All right, here we are back with Aunt Laurie. She's going to show us how she does her famous Aunt Laurie's sourdough bread. If you've ever been to a funeral meal at the college church, you probably have eaten this bread. We have used it for many things. I want to go ahead and say that Matilda says this works great with cake flour too. It can make rolls. That's Summer's comment. Mike Nutt says he could make sourdough pancakes out of it. McKenna said, don't drink the starter. I'm not sure what that means. And Isaac said, it's manna from heaven. It surely is. So take it away, Laurie.
All right, if you're making sourdough bread, it really is a 4-step process. None of the steps are difficult, but it takes over 2 days to do it, or it takes a couple of days to do it. So the first step is to get the starter out of the refrigerator where it's been sitting. We'll talk about where you get starter later, but this has been in the refrigerator from 3 to 10 days. It's best if you do it every week, just on a weekly basis. So if you like to do meal prep over the weekend and you're going to bake on Saturday, you need to start on Friday morning. You take your starter out of the refrigerator, you add 1 cup of warm water, and then a ½ cup of sugar. I do this so often that I keep my ½ cup measure in my sugar container here. So a ½ cup of sugar. And then 3 tablespoons of potato flakes. Again, I usually just keep my tablespoon measure in my potato flake box because this is the only thing I use it for. So 3 tablespoons of potato flakes. And then you stir it so that it's fairly well dissolved. Add that to your starter. And then it's going to sit out for the rest of the day. So if you started this process Friday morning, you're going to set this somewhere in a nice warm place for the rest of that day. And then Friday evening when you come in, you're going to make your sourdough bread. I don't have to usually cover this. You want it to breathe, but if you've got mats in the house or you're afraid of things getting in it, you can cover it loosely, put the cap on upside down there, or put some parchment or wax paper over it. I set mine in the windowsill and leave it, it says 8 to 12 hours. Well, after you've waited a while, you'll see that the starter has bubbled up a nice thick foam on top. And so it's ready. That serves as our leavening agent in the bread. So it's ready to go. We're ready to make the bread. This comes with 6 cups of flour and a ½ cup of sugar and a tablespoon of salt. That's our dry ingredients because it makes 3 loaves of bread. So I've got my 6 cups of flour in here, my ½ cup of sugar with the same scoop I used before, 1 tablespoon of salt. Now you can use brown or wheat flour to replace 2 cups of the 6 cups of flour that you need. I like the wheat bread a lot myself, but this one just has all 6 cups, and it's bread flour. Gold medal or Pillsbury works the best I've found. So those are our dry ingredients. I'm going to stir them together a little bit. And then we have 3 wet ingredients. First is the starter. So I stir it down. I just use the back of the spoon. I'm big on just using as few dishes as possible. So we're going to need a ½ cup of this. I've already measured my water. So we'll go with the water first. We've got 1½ cups of water. And then 1 cup of starter, although I usually go a little generous and make it 1 1/4 cups of starter. And then I need a ½ cup of oil. I've used coconut oil in this and it works really well. It's the liquid coconut oil. This is just plain vegetable oil. So if you've measured your flour in this, all of the measuring is taking place in this 1 big 4-cup measure. I need to rinse my spoon to stir. Now I mentioned before that we would talk a little bit about the starter. The starter has been passed around from person to person. I actually have no idea how to make that starter. It has some yeast in it. At some point it had yeast that got it started, I believe, but all we do is just add the sugar and potato flakes. Mine came from my sister-in-law. On Joe's side of the family in Alabama, my sister-in-law was making this bread and I got the starter from her. I got that when Anna was a baby while I was expecting Joseph. So it was back in 95. So this is like 23 years that we've been, or 28 years that we've been making this. And then I found out that she got it from a family friend, Maddie Faye Davidson. She was Maddie Faye Crowell for a long time, but she married David Davidson, who was a preacher at Kathy's Creek Church in Hampshire. So she was up in Hampshire where Mama Dean and Daddy Dean got married at that church. And so the starter, I think, started there and then went to Alabama, and then that's where I got it. And I've shared it with many, many people.
How many do you think you've shared it with? Would you estimate?
20 people, probably. And sometimes people have just taken it and fed it and never made bread. Like, if you're going to be gone a long time, you get somebody to babysit it for you, keep it going, because if you don't feed it a long time, it will die. Okay, now it looks like this, and you'll just spray it with oil and cover it with wax paper and set it aside.
Same piece.
And so if we started this process Friday morning, then Friday night before you go to the ball game or a movie, you mix up this, you leave it overnight, and then you come back Saturday morning ready to knead the bread. All right, so this would be on Saturday morning when you come back, the dough has risen. It's a nice wet, kind of a sticky dough. Make good moist bread that way. Now we're going to use our same flour. I usually have a little more area to work with, but I think we can fit it in right here. We're going to flour our surface. We punch down the dough and it collapses in, and then we put it out on our floured surface and we begin to knead the dough, working a little more flour into it as necessary. So we just fold and press, fold and press, fold and press, and we knead this. It activates the gluten, I understand. I don't know how all of that works, but I know it has to have some kneading in order to rise well, in order to trap all the air inside as it's rising. So we work this down and we work the air bubbles out of it. Make sure we get it to where it's a good consistency. And then we're going to do our best to separate it into 3 equal kind of lumps. I don't spend a lot of time kneading, but if it's a little wet, I just keep adding some flour until it gets the way I want it to be.
Would you think like 2 minutes or 5 minutes?
Probably not even 2 minutes would be my guess. Okay, so I'm going to split it into roughly 3 equal sections. I just pinch it apart and try to tell by weight if they feel about the same. That's pretty good. And then I just repeat the process with each. Now my pans here have been sprayed with olive oil. That's what I use. And then we just spray that with olive oil, put the loaves inside there, spray them with olive oil, and we're going to cover that and let it sit there and rise for another 8 to 12 hours. So you're started Friday morning feeding the starter, Friday night mix up the dough, Saturday morning knead the dough into loaves, and then Saturday afternoon sometime you'll bake the bread.
Getting a workout, Laurie.
So yeah, just shape it into a loaf best you can. Doesn't have to be perfect. And there's one. Now we'll repeat this with the other 2. We're going to spray it with olive oil, keep the top soft. If your bread is too dry, add more water. If it's too sticky, add more flour. It's pretty tough. It can handle some things where it goes wrong, but it can't handle when you spray the pans with Pledge.
I did that. Laurie,
And Cheryl sprayed the pans with Pledge.
I said, what did you do wrong? And I gave it to teachers. Merry Christmas.
And I think one time, and Matilda's got messed up because Caleb used some of her measuring cups with gasoline, funneling gasoline in, and he put it back in the kitchen, and then she used
That's
it
great.
and messed it up. So,
That's hilarious.
yeah, it can happen. Well, the fourth and final step of baking bread is baking it. So we have our loaves now. They have risen, and they're not fully risen. They will continue to rise in the oven, but we will want to bake them on 325 on the bottom rack of the oven. So I'm going to put them in the oven. And bake those for 35 minutes. That usually works out perfectly. So we'll check on those in a few minutes. All right, it's been 35 minutes, and if we peek in, you can see those loaves have risen a lot more. They look great. Now we just take them out and we put them on a cooling rack. So they usually slide right out of the pan. Pop right onto the cooling rack there.
Looks delicious, Laurie. It smells so good.
And they need to cool a while before they slice very well. You can put them in gallon baggies and keep them in the freezer. We're talking about all the different ways we've used this dough. We use it to make cinnamon rolls. Kelsey uses it to make cornbread, and her dressing is made with this. I've used it for French toast. If I have leftover bread, it makes meatloaf better. It's always good for just regular sandwiches or toast. Garlic bread, you can use it for anything. Our family loves it. Right, so now that it's cooled a little bit, we're gonna slice it. This knife, Daddy Dean bought for me, but I melted the handle off. But it's still the best bread knife there is. So when you slice into it,
It's beautiful.
it looks like that. It will slice better as it cools more. But here are a couple of slices for us to sample. Aunt Cheryl, I'm gonna put some butter on one for you.
Okay.
Sorry, my butter's too cold, but it'll melt right away.
Thank you.
And some for me. And how's your favorite way to eat it?
I like mine with toast.
I guess I'm not on a diet anymore. So Laurie brings this to all the funeral meals, and everybody wants to know, is it homemade? Who makes it? So you need to make this for yourself, and you can be famous like Laurie.
Slice the butter.
Okay. So I need to be out of the picture
No,
for
you
this.
need to be in.
Okay. All right.
You can start.
Uncle David likes to eat his.
No, wait. Start this over.
Okay, go ahead.
We just said all the ways it could be used.